USCHO.com. This is the USCHO Spotlight, a weekly podcast from U.S. College Hockey Online at USCHO.com, featuring conversations with college hockey coaches and players and journalists who cover the sport.
Welcome to USCHO Spotlight for Tuesday, November 5th, 2019. I'm Ed Trefzger along with Jim Connelly. Normally, we take a look at a specific team, maybe talk to a coach, but we're going to take things in a little bit different direction this week.
And we are going to talk this week about some major issues in NCAA athletics, particularly and most pressing, the recent decisions that the NCAA will look at allowing athletes to be compensated for, what might be sponsorship deals or using their likeness. And so we're bringing in somebody who I really respect on this topic, and I think that his input is very valuable. It's NCHC Commissioner Josh Fenton. Josh, first off, thanks for joining, but this is kind of an issue that we can go a long ways with, and there's a lot of undecided, unventured territory ahead of us.
Yeah, first off, good to be with you guys. Always good to speak with both of you and being on your podcast. Yeah, I mean, the action last week by the NC's Board of Governors was really just a direction to each of the divisions across the NCAA that, bylaws should be updated and changed in the future to allow student athletes to profit off their name, image, and likeness. The actual mechanics of how that works and kind of what the weeds will tell us in time is still in development form. So I think, everybody saw the headline that ran across all the tickers last week that said the NCAA is going to allow student athletes to profit off their name, image, and likeness, which is true, and they will be moving in that direction. But the actual how to do that still will need quite a bit of work.
What's the biggest benefit and threat, I guess, out of this? I mean, obviously the athletes, finally probably getting recognized financially for what they do and accomplish is something that's positive. But there seems to be maybe some more positives, but also some possible dangerous stepping stones in front of us.
Yeah, there's a lot that's intertwined in this topic. I think first off, people have recognized that the economic engine of college athletics has grown at a rate and an exponential rate that maybe people 15, 20 years ago wouldn't have thought could come to be. Most of the revenue that's tied up in collegiate athletics is tied up in large national media agreements, television agreements. Certainly there's significant revenue that's generated at the gate with ticket sales and sponsorship deals and licensing agreements and those types of things. But the explosion of revenue has really come from the larger media agreements. And so the economic engine of college athletics has really exploded. And, it wasn't that long ago where we had no athletic department budgets above $100 million. And now we have quite a few Division I athletic department budgets above $100 million, and some that I think have approached and even maybe surpassed $200 million. And so I think that's gotten the attention, rightfully so, of just society across the board of, where's the money being spent. And I think two areas that probably have caused an issue in our industry have been salaries and facilities. One could say that obviously retaining quality staff, whether it be coaches or whatnot, is essential into providing excellent experiences for student athletes. And I would argue that that is the case. But I think the salaries have grown at a rate that certainly has gotten people's attention much more so. And then you've seen a lot of facilities that have been built, a lot of extravagant facilities, athletically related facilities. I like to look at them as kind of athletic classrooms. Again, they're for the student athlete experience, and I think they've only enhanced the experiences of student athletes on campus. However, facilities have been built in some manners that many have seen to be extravagant and a bit over the top. So the overall economic engine of college athletics has grown a great deal, and I think people have looked at that and said, well, it's on the backs of, so to speak, of student athletes, and the additional revenue that's come and the additional financial opportunities that have been in front of us have been because of the efforts of student athletes. In particular, two sports, football and men's basketball, and to some extent women's basketball, drive a lot of our economic engine of collegiate athletics. But, football and men's basketball are two of the main drivers. And so I think people have seen, is there opportunities for student athletes to financially benefit off of their talent, their name, image, and likeness? And I think we've gotten to ourselves to the point where a large group of people across our industry have been in favor of that, including myself. Now, the how to do it is the sticky part or the tricky part. And there are kind of unintended consequences that can come. I mean, the recruiting concerns, I think, are first and foremost the biggest thing that is on the minds of people that are going to have to figure out the model that's going to have to be in place that's going to work. Pre-enrollment inducements by donors or sponsors or whatnot to entice a prospect to attend an institution is a real situation and something that none of us want in collegiate athletics. And so, there are recruiting concerns about how this will play out. I think there's some concerns about, how do you completely untether a student athlete's name, image, and likeness, their talents and abilities to the institution that they are a part of or a team that they're a part of? Obviously, there are marks and logos of that institution that would not be able to be used in any sort of endorsement deal by a student athlete. But to completely, fully kind of untether the relationship between the student athlete and the institution, and to say that the endorsement or the sponsorship deal is purely based upon the name, image, and likeness of that particular student athlete without some tie back to or tethering of the school or the program that he or she is a part of, I think is a really hard ask. I think there are, Jim, you and I've talked about this in the past. I think there are differences that could come from small markets in our country, medium-sized markets in our country, and even large-sized markets in our country. And I happen to believe that there's maybe more benefit for student athletes in these opportunities in the smaller to the medium-sized markets in our country. The large metropolitan cities of our country, you kind of can get swallowed up in everything that's going on in those markets. And so, those are some of the few things that the group that's having to put together the practicality of this is going to have to think through.
When we look at all of this in a more microcosmic sense in a college hockey, you pointed out that men's basketball and football have the largest potential to benefit. Do you see college hockey as being impacted by this? And if so, is it, as you said, kind of more at the smaller level type of endorsement, or do you think that equipment and apparel and those types of companies that usually seem to dominate sponsorships? Do you feel that that's an area that will maybe see some movement?
Well, I think specifically to hockey, I think this topic is something that we're going to have to watch closely, because I do think that there could be an impact on our sport. I think there are opportunities that probably could be out there for college hockey players in various markets. I do tend to think that maybe those opportunities are more impactful in the smaller sized markets than they would be in the larger markets. And as you both know, we have a lot of college hockey programs in kind of small to medium sized markets in our country. And so I do think that there probably would be some opportunities. I think the concerns go back to the same concerns about, all sports, recruiting, and how do you untether the value of that student athlete to the program he's a part of, he or she's a part of. But I do think that hockey will have some opportunities, and I think we're going to have to kind of wait and see how the legislation comes to be over the next year to 2 years. But something that we're going to have to think about.
We'll have more with NCHC Commissioner Josh Fenton in a moment.
This is the USCHO Spotlight, a weekly podcast from US College Hockey Online.
We're back with NCHC Commissioner Josh Fenton. You mentioned the smaller markets as opposed to the larger markets, and that was intriguing to me because first I was thinking as this came through, boy, this is going to be a big help for a school like Michigan or Ohio State or some of the big names that are not involved in college hockey. But then as I'm thinking about it, cities like Grand Forks or Colorado Springs or Kalamazoo or Oxford or even Marquette, Michigan or Burlington, Vermont all come to mind. Is that what you have in mind, being kind of a bigger fish in a smaller pond?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's exactly right, Ed, and kind of how I thought about this in a little bit my mind. Now, the reality is, what is the value of that, big fish in the small pond to the corporate entities, so to speak, in and around that market? I guess time will tell. I'd be hard pressed to believe that there's significant dollars out there for a large swath of student athletes across all sports that will make a big benefit to them by signing sponsorship deals or what have you. There certainly will be some, but yeah, I think definitely it will be interesting to see how this plays out in the smaller to medium-sized market compared to the large metropolitan markets where there's already a lot going on, whether it be with pro sports or other entertainment, things that have people's minds and eyes captivated.
You also mentioned recruiting concerns, and I know there are very strict rules on things like what even boosters and so forth can do. Is that the kind of thing you're concerned about? You find somebody with some big pockets and says, hey, I'll give this kid a big sponsorship deal to come by my car dealership if he signs to go to the school. Is that the sort of thing you're concerned about there?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, if it's not regulated in some manner, the use of the student athlete's name and image and likeness, it certainly could inappropriately or negatively impact the recruiting process. Is there, for instance, a possible endorsement agreement kind of explicitly or implicitly implied to a prospective student athlete, if he or she attends a particular college or university? I think those are real life things that those of us that are thinking about this topic and issue have to put our hands around and try to figure out. And I think the other side of it is third parties. Agents, advisors. Number one, is the legislation going to have to allow for some amendment and representation for current student athletes to have agent, advisor type of service provided to them so they can fairly negotiate whatever deal they feel as though they can get in their market. Right now that obviously is not allowed. And so, is there going to have to be some relaxing of agent advisor legislation for current student athletes? But, the pre-enrollment prior to them becoming a student athlete, we already have impact and influence of agents and advisors in our world of just collegiate sports in general. But will it become even more so trying to, again, peddle some type of sponsorship deal as an inducement for that prospective student athlete to attend the institution? So, yeah, there's a lot that's intertwined there in the recruiting process that is going to have to get figured out.
And one complication we didn't even get to that has come up through this is some prominent politicians have gotten into the discussion, even the idea that there would be a bill introduced to tax scholarships if the NCAA does that. I'm sure that's got to be part of the whole consideration too.
Yeah, I saw that. I think that was out of North Carolina in the last week or so. Some type of state official made mention of that. I'm a firm believer that the value of the education and the value of the scholarship at whatever school you're at is a tremendous amount of value for that particular student athlete. Plus the fact that we provide room, board, fees, cost of living, cost of attendance, stipends. They basically have unlimited meals. And I realize that may pale in comparison to the economic engine that college athletics has become. But there still is a tremendous amount of value in the scholarship and that everything that comes with the scholarship that a student athlete receives. And I think by and large, for the majority of student athletes across this country, the value of that scholarship and everything it brings to it is a tremendous amount of value for those student athletes. I think there's a few small percentage that could gain beyond the value of that scholarship by profiting off their name, image, and likeness. But I don't think it will be a large swath numbers across the board, because ultimately I don't think that the market will bear a ton of endorsement deals with just a variety of student athletes. But time will tell.
Well, time will tell, and there's a lot more that we'll need to understand in the coming days, weeks, and months. We are joined now by Josh Fenton. He's the NCHC commissioner, and while we have you, might as well touch on some of the hot button issues in your conference right now. I'd say it was an experiment, but it's something you're doing this year, miking the referees so that the fans in the buildings can get some understanding of, not just the penalties that are being called, but maybe some of the video review elements and decisions that are made that otherwise fans would be kind of blind to. How's that worked out through the first month of the season?
We've liked what we've seen in the first month. There's some technical glitches and tweaks that need to be made as we've gone along, learning about how high the volume needs to be and when we're toggling microphones on and off and all that good stuff that comes with learning how to use something like this. But by and large, it's doing what we intended it to do, which was provide a better experience for really two audiences, the in-venue audience plus the audience that's watching on television or through a digital stream. I think the microphones are adding an element to the game that sometimes I think was just kind of lost when the referee would report the penalty or the video review situation to the scores table, and then it would have to be recited in some manner through the public address announcement, and maybe that got to the people calling the game on radio or calling the game on television, and maybe it didn't. And so I think this adds a little bit more clarity, and the feedback that we received has been extremely positive thus far. And again, there will always be technical things that we have to fix and figure out, but by and large, it's been a good experiment.
I think there's also the other potential glitch is the human element, because it's not something that every referee is used to doing. It's remembering to turn that mic on, remembering to say something before you jump in and look at a video review, remembering to give a good explanation after. That's something not all these referees, they're not NHL refs and have done this for years. It's something that they have to get used to as well.
Yeah, you're right, Jim. I mean, we to be honest with you, I don't know how many weeks we've progressed here. 5-ish weeks, I think, if you include that common start weekend. I think we've sent 5 weekly memos out to the referees with something new or just kind of a little tidbit of advice to help them as we notice things in each venue. And, it's things like standing still in front of the scores table, making sure that you speak slowly and clearly. I mean, it's the reality of the situation. And, I think for them not being in that moment a whole lot in the past could be a little bit daunting, but I give our guys a ton of credit. They've done excellent work, and they've actually gotten a lot better as these 5 weeks have progressed. But you're right. It's something that they hadn't done a whole lot in the past. A few of the guys on our staff have done it working pro hockey, and so they've had some experience, and they've lended their voice to kind of the rest of the staff, which has helped. But our guys have gotten a lot better, and they do a great job of it already a month into it.
Another issue, well, it's kind of a college hockey wide issue. Your league has addressed it. Again, the overtime format, and Ed and I had a little rant on our weekly review podcast that ran earlier this week. Atlantic Hockey, they have become the 4th conference to move toward a 5-on-5, followed by a 3-on-3, followed by a shootout for their overtime protocol. Your conference was really the early adopter of it all. Do you feel like here we are again next summer, we're going to be in a battle, or do you feel like this is a topic that is starting to sway and people are understanding that for the betterment of the sport, 3-on-3 and a shootout is something that's kind of going to be necessary to have in the game very soon?
Well, I think it's incumbent upon us in college hockey to get this figured out. I think that there's more momentum for it today than there was a year or 2 years ago. Absolutely. You mentioned Atlantic Hockey and good for Atlantic Hockey and moving that direction, which now gives us 4 of 6 conferences that are using some aspect of 3-on-3 or a shootout to decide conference points. So I think, and my hope is that we can take that momentum and only build on it over the course of the season into the rules committee meeting in June, to where we have some standard that involves 3-on-3 starting with the 2021 season. Again, I fully recognize and respect that a lot goes into it. I think we get too hung up on the quote-unquote credit for a win or a loss in a 3-on-3 session. I've said all along that I think that that's something that can get figured out over time, and that's simply a math problem. And when I mean credit in your conference standings, whether it's how you're dividing points, or credit on a national scale, whether the RPI is stopped after 60 minutes or the RPI continues, yet the credit is marginalized a little bit by the winner maybe receiving only a little bit more than the loser in a 3-on-3 session. But I think for the good of the game, we can't get hung up on that, and that for the experience of our student athletes and the experiences of our fans, that this is the right direction to go. And I'm hopeful that the game at large will move in that direction, and the rules committee will see there's a desire to move there and ultimately make that decision next summer. One interesting side note, I had a text exchange with somebody last week who said that they were sitting down with their freshman student athletes, and they said to them, what do you think about overtime? And apparently they had just played a game that had ended in a tie after 5-on-5 overtime. And all of them said that was the first time in their life that they had ever played a game that had ended in a tie. And so I just think it speaks to the point of the rest of the world from a elite hockey entity standpoint has moved in this direction. It's time for college hockey to move in that direction.
Well, we will certainly keep our ears, our eyes open, and look forward to more conversations about this. Josh Fenton, Commissioner of the NCHC, your intelligence, your insight is really always appreciated. So thanks so much for taking the time out to join us and talk about these timely topics.
Always appreciate being with you guys. Thank you.
Jim, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that the leadership of the NCHC, and particularly Josh Fenton as its commissioner, has had a lot to do with moving college hockey forward as it's been moving lately.
Yeah, I think you're right by that, Ed. And, Josh, he's a mind that maybe isn't always surrounded by the game of hockey. He's come from different backgrounds. He's seen probably more business-like issues in his career. And I think that he takes a thoughtful approach to everything that goes into what they do. And I think that most of the commissioners do as well. But I like his mental attitude toward a lot of things in hockey. He understands ways to move things forward. He understands that there's not a silo of 6 leagues. He believes that there's a need for leagues to work together. And I think when it comes to big issues like this, that he will have his thumb firmly planted on it. He'll have the pulse, and he'll understand where things are going to go. So I liked getting his opinion thrown into this. I mean, I have my own, you have your own. We've talked a little bit about it in past episodes, but I think, hearing it for somebody who's dead on the inside and will probably be, part of having to figure out some of the potential impact this has on college hockey, it's great to get some input from him.
I have a couple of things I'd like to follow up with you on with that Josh talked about, Jim. One of them is unintended consequences, especially when you look at things like a pre-enrollment sponsorship or getting involved in having an incentive for recruiting a player. And the other one is talking about small and medium markets. Let's talk about recruiting first. Policing this whole thing sounds like it could be a real bear.
Yeah, I almost asked the question, and we, just for a time, I kind of let it go, but it will be something that you have to understand how much effort the NCAA puts into policing in its current structure. that they are always, every school is required to have a compliance officer. The NCAA, probably one of their biggest departments is their compliance department, because we see it all the time how shady things can get if you don't enforce and make sure that people are doing the right things. If you give anybody a chance to get a competitive advantage in athletics, they're usually going to take it. So now if we're looking at this as a potential to be a competitive advantage in the recruiting process, that really needs to be kind of cut off before anything can even start. That's why people think that, legislation went through that means tomorrow night athletes can start getting paid. That is absolutely not the case. The NCAA said that they will need to look at this and they will work toward a solution. And that is what's important, is that this solution is going to have to cover so much. And I do believe in the end, people deservedly so will get some financial compensation for what they've done and the fact that their likeness or their name or their image is used. But at the same time, don't just think that this is now a free-for-all spending spree where any college can, basically talk about financial free agency and that you can start throwing $1 million bonuses at kids to sign. That's going to be the issue that the NCAA will have to tackle, and that I think is the number one priority as we move this whole thing forward.
The other thing that struck me is the idea that it would benefit small to medium markets more. Initially, I thought that the Big Ten schools in college hockey, for instance, whether you talk about Notre Dame or Wisconsin or Penn State or the others, would benefit because they have a big name. But you look at the NCHC outside of Denver, the rest are not pro markets, major markets, whether you talk Grand Forks, Colorado Springs, Omaha, Oxford, Ohio, Kalamazoo, St. Cloud, or Duluth, Minnesota. There's an opportunity for people to be a big deal there. Same with the other leagues around college hockey. I think of the ECAC and some of the small towns up north or in Colgate or Cornell. I mentioned Vermont in there too. Maine would be another one in that category. There seems to be the opportunity to be more recognized as being part of a smaller program in a smaller town.
Yeah, and I don't have a lot of familiarity with that because I've lived my entire 46 years in Boston, which is one of the largest DMAs in the country. And I look at, and Josh and I had talked about this offline last week, some of these major markets, you have 4 professional sports teams. You add in a soccer team here in Boston, we have 5. And I can count on, probably 2 hands and maybe my toes, the number of athletes that actually have endorsement deals at the pro level. So now we're going to take this down to the college level. There just isn't there won't be the opportunity. There won't be as much opportunity. If it is, it's maybe for 1 or 2 players here and there. But, I was up in Burlington, Vermont last week. On the way up, I stopped at Norwich to see an old friend there. Like, those are 2 little towns in Vermont, and Burlington's maybe not that small, but there's a lot of money that probably exists there that can be dished out for endorsement deals. And these programs, especially I'm going to go back to Norwich, their hockey team, that's the show there. That's the weekend entertainment in Northfield, Vermont. Burlington, Vermont, maybe it's not just the men's hockey team, maybe it's the men's basketball team as well. But, there's just not a lot of other entertainment options. And you go into towns like Grand Forks, we know that the Fighting Hawks, that I almost called them the Sioux, are the only show in town. There's a lot of other those types of markets, maybe not in large scale college athletics, but in college hockey, there's more teams in tiny markets. I'm not even going to get into medium markets, just small markets than there are in large markets. So will there be more of those monies available? I don't expect to see the $1 million endorsement deal or the big deal, but $500 here and there and $500 here and there to record a commercial for a car dealership or for whatever the local business is, the local barbershop, whatever it is, these people that might have some extra money lying around in their marketing budgets, that will maybe now go toward a college hockey player. So I think there's positives to it. There's some great positives. I think that these student athletes need to be compensated, but there are pitfalls, and there's going to have to be a lot of effort put into addressing those things, or we're going to have, you don't want to have rampant money, free agency type money moving around college hockey. We already have enough problems as it is in college athletics. So I want to make sure that I want to see the NCAA takes positive steps toward making the recruiting process crystal clear.
And not to mention players that get some recognition during the course of a season, the kind of guys who were talked about for the Hobie Baker Award, Cale Makar, or many years ago, Johnny Gaudreau, all of a sudden become hot properties. Same thing with the Richter Award, somebody who's going to be a hot goalie. There's going to be the opportunity, whether it's for equipment or whatever. Certainly those names are going to be important. Well, I'm sure we're going to talk about this quite a bit more as it goes forward, and I suspect this is going to be something that is going to take several years, not months or days, to resolve. For Jim Connelly, I'm Ed Trefzger. Make sure you check out our other podcast, USCHO Game of the Week, coming up later in the week, and after the weekend, USCHO Weekend Review. For Jim Connelly, I'm Ed Trefzger, and we'll catch you next time.
This has been the USCHO Spotlight, a production of US College Hockey Online. Visit uscho.com/podcasts to listen or subscribe.